Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Code with B. In this video, we will learn how to create GraphQL server in Node.js. For this, we have already created one project that contains a Node.js server using Hapi. Let's have a look at the dependencies we have. So we have got Hapi dependency. Also, we have got Babel dependencies, which is needed to transpile the JavaScript code to the older JavaScript versions. And we have got NodeMon. It will automatically restart the server with any code changes. We have also created one very basic Hapi route. It responds with a welcome message for the get API at the root path. If we start the server now and hit the get API, it will respond with a welcome message. That was about existing dependencies. Now we will add GraphQL capability in our server. For that, we will add two dependencies. One, the GraphQL, and another one is Apollo Server Hapi. Apollo Server Hapi works as a bridge between Node.js server and the GraphQL. If you are working with Express server, Apollo Server Express. It will add another route to the Node server. So all the GraphQL related routes will be handled by the Apollo Server Hapi. Now, as we have added the dependencies, so we will inject the GraphQL server in Node server. So for that, we will create the Apollo server. Apollo server requires few parameters that we will add in a bit. But before that, we will add Hapi server as a middleware to the Apollo server, which will create two routes, one related to the Hapi, which will be handled by the Hapi route, and others for the GraphQL, which will be handled by the Apollo server. Now, if we start the server, so it throws some errors. Let's look at the errors. It says Apollo server requires either an existing schema, module, or the type depth. The schema is at the core of GraphQL. All the resources which can be accessed by a client are defined within the schema. A schema or type depths can be injected to the GraphQL server using the constructor parameter. For this example, we will use a schema. So we will add that schema to the constructor. Let's create a separate file for the schema. Here we will define the schema. So let's create a constant schema. The schema has to be a GraphQL schema type. So we will instantiate this schema with the GraphQL schema. Before we add argument to the constructor of the GraphQL schema, let's look at the errors. So here the error is query root type must be provided. For any schema, we need query type or a mutation. So by default, you need a query type and you can add additionally the mutation. Query is used to access the resource from the server, whereas the mutation is required to update or create any resource on the server. So without the query, GraphQL is nothing. So we will define a query. All the type has to have a GraphQL object type. So we will define a query with the GraphQL object type. Query needs a name. This name is uniquely identifiable across the schema. We will give it a name, query type, and also we can add description. It will tell you what this type does or what it is for. Let's add a description, root type for queries. If we look at the server again, it has more errors. Query type field must be an object with field names as keys. Every type needs to have fields. Those fields should be an object. Fields are the accessible entities from the client. Client will use these fields for the query or for the mutation. Now we will add one field welcome. Every field should have a type. This type could be a scalar type such as string, enum, int, boolean, or it could be a custom object which can in turn have either another custom object or the scalar types. So for the simplicity, we will use a GraphQL string type. We can add the description. So for this field, welcome type. Okay. Now if you look at the server, it is running fine. GraphQL has provided a dev tool where all the queries or mutation can be tested and verified. When we added the Apollo server Hapi with Hapi server, it added additional route. So this route is by default accessible at GraphQL, which is configured in the Apollo server. So we can update this path to make another route, but for this example, we will stick to the GraphQL, and at this point, the dev tool is accessible. We can query anything from the GraphQL server. We can query the schema. We can find out all the types defined, and we can also query and do the location. So for now, we will look at all the types. Every type should have a name and it can have description. So if we apply that and hit the play icon, it returns all the types. For example, we have created the query type, so it is there. Similarly, it will have all the types. Now for the query, we will use query and we can give it a name, the field name, which is welcome. So if we run the query, it returns null. This is because we haven't defined any resolver for our field. We have to define the resolver. So for that, there is a resolve method. So here we can return anything which we have defined as a type of our field. So in this case, it's a string. So we will return welcome all as a string. So if you run the query again, it returns the welcome all message. So this is about defining a query and accessing it. Every resolver can have few parameters. It can have parent, it can have argument, it can have context. Who's the reference of the parent of the particular field? For this time, because this is a simple GraphQL string type, we don't have parent, but we can have parent when we are talking about the complex object that holds the reference of another object. Argument is provided by the client and context will hold the contextual information. Let's print these objects so that we will be able to know the value of the parents, argument and the context. So you can see that we have got argument, which is an empty object, parent, which is undefined, context have some information. So this information can be used while authorization. And now we will add one argument. So for all the arguments, we need to provide a type. We will define one argument ID with a type GraphQL string. And if we run the query by providing the ID as an argument, so yeah, so here as we are passing integer value and we are expecting the string, so GraphQL will fail. So it is type safe. Now if we provide the correct string value, now you see we have got the argument which is we have passed from the client. So argument will be used for the any client information that need to be passed to the server. Now we will look at how to create a custom type. So for that we have a products list and every product contains the ID, name, brand, category and price. We will create a custom type. So we are creating a type for the product. So it's a product type and it will be a GraphQL object type. All the type should have a name. So we will define it a name product. We will define fields for this type. So we have identified the fields ID, name, brand, category and price. So let's define ID. It will be a GraphQL string type. Similarly, we can define name, we can define brand and we can define category. For the price, as it is a float type, so we will add float. Now we have defined the type. Let's add this type to the schema. So we will create a product field and its type would be product type and we can give it a description. We want to get a product based on certain criteria, like we want to find out a product with ID provided by the query. So we will use the args and now in the resolver method we will find out the product such that the ID provided in the query should equal to the ID in the product. So now if we run the query by providing the field product, and we need to pass the argument which is id, and let's add 1. If you run the query, field should be provided for the objects. So first time when we created a GraphQL string type, we need not to provide any field, but now as we have a type which contains fields, so we have to provide all the fields which we want to fetch. So we can provide all fields or a specific field which we want to fetch. So in this case, we are just providing id and name. It will return product with id and name. Now we will define a product list. So we want to fetch all the products. For that, let's define a field products. Because we are looking for a list, so we will use GraphQL list. We will wrap the product type within this list. The description would be list of products, and for the resolving we don't need argument because we need to return all the products, so we will just return the product. And now if you run the query for the product, for the id, name and brand, it returns all the product with id, name and brand. So in this video we have learned how to create GraphQL server in Node.js, and also how to query the GraphQL server, creating the custom types and passing the argument. In the next video we will learn the mutation types. Till then, happy coding.